Part 2 of the cloud study is about color and the choices that are open to me when painting. When it comes to choosing a color palette, there are different types of thinking that can guide me. In visual thinking, the eyes are my tool. I will look at the subject and try to identify and analyze the colors. As I do this, I will also try to associate actual pigments with what I see. There are color choices to be made, and what are these choices based upon? Since the sky dominates the composition, the blue that I choose is quite important. I will base almost all of my other color choices upon it, so which blue is the right one? The white and gray of the clouds tell me that I will need a complementary pair of colors. Here are my possible choices. The wheat field is yellow, and here are some other possible choices for that. The foliage will be based upon my choice of yellow and blue. When choosing the color palette, visual analysis and color theory can guide me, but painting is more than an intellectual process. It's also about personal ideas, opinions, and experiences. When I'm not sure which color route to take, I will dive into my materials and experiment by doing color studies. This is thinking with the materials. Looking at the two studies, neither is correct or incorrect. Assuming that I'm not trying to paint an exact copy of my subject, either can work. My choice is based upon how I feel about them. An ultramarine sky seems softer, whereas the cobalt sky makes me think of a clear, dry summer day. Here is the palette that I've chosen. The darker part of the sky is ultramarine blue, and as I lighten it, there's a slight shift in color towards phthalo blue. The clouds are based on the complementary pair of cadmium orange and ultramarine blue. The wheat field begins with a mix of yellow ochre and cadmium yellow light, and the green of the foliage is begun as a mix of cadmium yellow light and ultramarine blue. In stage 1 of the color process, I scrub in a thin layer of color. There is no painting medium in the paint. Thin simply means not much paint. My aim is to lay in the colors throughout the whole composition. I'm focusing on the large shapes, light, shadow for each element of the composition. Keep in mind that the colors that were initially mixed on the palette are just a starting point. They are constantly changed and refined so that they work in relationship to each other on the canvas. Once the canvas is covered, I can assess what I've done and where I will go. In stage 2, I will refine my painting by adding more detail and complexity to both the shapes and the colors. Here is the palette at the end of the painting, which shows a broader mix of yellows and greens. Starting with the sky, I strengthen the tones of blue by adding more color. At this point, my brush is loaded with much more paint and color is liberally applied. I close the gap between the clouds and sky, eliminating the underpainting. There is no need to blend. Because the paint is wet and quite thick, edges are softened when one tone crosses into the other. Taking into account the concept of aerial perspective, the clouds closer to the horizon have less contrast and more blue in them than those higher up in the sky. The texture of the wheat field is accomplished by using small broken brush strokes that allow the dark ochre beneath to show through. To get the sense of depth, the field gets progressively lighter as it moves into the distance towards the horizon. The distant trees maintain their simple shapes, and they are also lightened with cooler greens and blue-greens to reinforce the illusion of depth and distance. The foreground tree has the most detail. The tones are progressively lightened with greens that are lighter and warmer. Small brush strokes are used to elaborate the shapes of the different masses of foliage. Finally, the cloud shapes and colors are further refined. Here is a quick review of the different stages of the painting process. For the underpainting, a tonal ground is used to work through the composition and tonal structure. Thinking with both my eyes and my materials, I make color choices based upon color analysis, color theory, studies, and my own personal feelings. Stage 1 is the first layer of color. I want to cover the canvas using simple color relationships and minimal details. Stage 2 is to refine the different elements of the composition. There is greater color complexity, shapes are refined, and details added.